All right, so welcome to the panel on cross-country, unpacking regionalism in documentary filmmaking. And this was something that was conceived after realizing that we were in yet another election cycle. And remembering back in 2016, the documentary film community intensified efforts to bring more stories from beyond urban media hubs to light. What does that mean? It means that a lot of the content that's created is either in New York or LA or Chicago. And so, inspired by pioneering organizations like Apple Shop and Cartemquin Films, a new wave of initiatives has emerged to amplify the voices of diverse regional communities. Today we ask, how effective has this regional approach been? And what will it take to sustain and expand the efforts? So I'm very happy to introduce my friend, Nick Price. Nick Price serves as the series producer for award-winning PBS series Real South. He was born, raised, and trained is the important word if you're Southern, in Birmingham, Alabama. He began his documentary work as a film fellow for the Southern Exposure documentary series at the Southern Environmental Law Center. And he's also worked with National Geographic and Discovery. So welcome, Nick Price.
That was really generous and kind. I thought I was going to introduce myself and much more briefly. Thanks for joining us after your lunch. I hope many of you are still eating, and that's great. I would love to invite my fellow panelists up here as well because, well, we have a lot of introductions to get to, and I want to just kind of prompt you all to kind of think about these smaller organizations around the country in many places that most of you maybe have never been to or have only read about or watched. And I think there's a little bit of an imbalance in the fact that we're constantly introducing and reintroducing ourselves in the sort of weight and burden that we have to do to introduce our organizations and the work that we do. We're not Sundance. That comes without an explanation. So I'm just going to start by saying again, I'm Nick. I'm the series producer for Real South, which is a PBS documentary series. We work with filmmakers making work in the American South to platform stories that really meet our mission about diversifying and expanding what the narratives around the American South are for public television, public media audiences. So I just wanted to go ahead and do that, and then let's get into some of our introductions. Sitting with me here is Aaron, and Aaron represents Apple Shop, so I'll just let you kind of go.
First of all, thank you all. I'm very excited to be here at Apple Shop. We were honored to receive an invitation to come to this event. So my name is Aaron Asbury. I am the visual communications manager for Apple Shop, and much of my work is in social media and film distribution. Apple Shop, if you're not familiar, is a media-based arts organization. We're a nonprofit. We've existed since 1969, and our missions have been to uplift, much like Real South, a similar vibe, to uplifting the stories of Appalachians and allowing them to tell their own stories. If you're familiar with the history of Appalachia, there's been a history of other people telling our stories for us, and not doing so always in the most genuine manner, and not doing so in the most authentic and diverse manner like we are. So we try to do that ourselves.
Did you have any clips today, Mr. John?
Oh, yes, I forgot. We do have a clip. It's from a movie. I think it's about 20 years old. It's called Sludge, and it is available on our YouTube channel if it interests you.
There's no such thing as clean coal. We're making our kids jump through hoops for materialistic things while we're destroying their future. We're using up all their coal and all their oil, and we're polluting their land and their air and their water in the way that we're producing so-called cheap energy. And our kids don't even know it.
The power that we really have here, God, we're sitting on a gold mine. It's more important than gold. You can't run your TV on gold. So here we are sitting in one of the most richest areas in the United States because of the coal, and we're letting them do anything they want to just to get the coal.
And we're not going to have a damn thing to show for it when they pack up and go back to New York and Washington and Richmond and everywhere in the hell they live.
That's it. Look at that. Here's a big pile. Everything looks like it's all over. There's no more story in Martin County. Let's just go. Those people crying around about slurry, it's all been cleaned up. You can see right there that it's not been cleaned up. And it's not going to be cleaned up. And as long as you have corrupt agencies working alongside the United States government to get energy at all costs, then this whole country is going to be tainted. If it's not with sludge, it'll be with some other toxic chemical. When all these other people around who live here, they're a throwaway culture, you see, because we need the coal. We need the coal. It pisses me off, man.
Media Arts South. We are a sort of subgroup that was created from an initiative from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Sundance Institute to kind of address the regionalism, I think, and documentary filmmaking and the arts. We are a member-led organization, and our work is really about community building for Southern filmmakers. And we do that really primarily through, we do monthly regional meetings where we gather people. A lot of this is really about connecting filmmakers to each other, especially, and with sort of the general South in that sense, so connecting filmmakers. But also, we have a talent database, and we also are starting an initiative, which is works in progress, to really be able to, for the filmmakers to get feedback from their peers, but also from industry professionals. I think, I have a small clip here of a video that we started. Well, it was used as a fundraiser recently, but it gives you some sense of what members are thinking about their experience with us. So.
My name is Jessica Chrisman, and I am an independent filmmaker based in Birmingham, Alabama.
So I'm Elaine McMillian Sheldon, and I'm a director. I make films about my home region of Appalachia.
My name is Amala Torreya. I'm an independent producer, director, cinematographer, and film programmer from El Salvador.
My work focuses on the intersections of food and culture and social justice and history and nonprofits and the people they serve.
I'm based in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I teach at the University of Tennessee School of Art.
I'm also the Director of Education and Outreach for Sidewalk Film Festival here in Birmingham, and I have been an IMAS member since 2020.
I work independently on projects that I conceive and largely work with small crews of 2 to 3 people. And most of my collaborators are living here in the South in Appalachia.
I feel incredibly fortunate to be a part of the Indie Media Arts South community. I came to the United States in 2014, and the first place that I lived in was South Carolina. South Carolina is the place where I became a filmmaker, and it wouldn't have been possible without Southern media makers and filmmakers.
IMAS is invaluable to our region because it brings people of varied backgrounds and experiences together with a combined purpose of making the South a great place for media makers and media organizations. And IMAS really connects us in a way that we haven't been connected before.
IMAS has provided a space where we can learn about what each other are working on and learn how to support one another. So the connections that I've been able to make through IMAS really helped me feel more connected to this larger Southern community.
It's a place for all of us to come together and celebrate each other's work and learn more, and also open up dialogue about what we see and think is possible for our filmmaking communities. It's that very sense of possibility that made me feel supported.
I also credit this group in helping me get my current job simply by letting me be in conversations with these decision makers and people who know each other in the filmmaking world in the South, in low stakes situations, and just chill Zooms where I can give my opinion in a way that is comfortable and not high pressure situations.
Next up is Laura Deutch. I think I'm saying that right, but from Filmmaking.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm with Filmmaking. We're the public access community television station in Philadelphia. So we're a nonprofit community media center. We also operate a radio station. And basically, we open our doors to anybody in the greater Philadelphia area and the region to come through and access really affordable classes, field production equipment, television studios, and we distribute the work on our cable channels and online. So I have a clip happy to show as well.
My mind is just filled with ideas. That's why I needed Filmmaking. Coming here, they helped me put those ideas together. They helped me do the shows that I wanted to do.
Why I love Filmmaking so much is the camaraderie and the fellowshipping that happens in the space and the way it just brings people together.
There's such a depth of people, of neighborhoods, of communities. It's kind of amazing.
I never really realized it was so many creative people walking the streets. The big thing about Filmmaking, it provides a platform for those people to show their creative sides and their work.
It's the people who come from opposite ends of Philadelphia, and they can come in here and work together and do that process, relate to one another.
Having this little radio station really feels like it's filling so many little niches that need to be represented in the city.
Así que les vamos a invitar a ustedes a participar.
Last year, we worked with teens who were directly impacted by gun violence. We always hear about the victims, which is very important. We rarely hear about why someone would make that choice. Of course, Filmmaking is our home, so we hosted our screening here. But just having the opportunity to invite the community in to see it was just a wonderful experience.
Most children and teenagers, they simply don't have the outlets that, we do as adults. To have our voices validated, to have our beliefs validated. Hear Us Out is one of the youth media programs here at Filmmaking, and I was part of the second ever cohort.
A lot of our schools are underfunded. A lot of our schools don't have what we need as students to succeed.
Now that I'm older, I've become an instructor, and it's been one of the most rewarding experiences.
We were creating a series of videos with the different candidates. We got to kind of see the inside of the political system in a way that we had an authentic youth experience in our story to tell.
Despite what you were born into, we're going to make sure that you have access to every opportunity you can to succeed.
You kind of need a place for people to work and build on those ideas, and that's where Filmmaking comes to place. And it's I cannot really see Philadelphia without a place like Filmmaking.
As many of us know, the stories are in the neighborhood.
We do this out of love, and it's free for the entire community.
The stories are with the people with the boots on the ground.
Philadelphia is like a tube of toothpaste. Every time you think you're kind of empty, you can always squeeze a little bit more out of it. And that's Philadelphia. There's always more.
It's a city that prides itself immensely in its identity. There is no better way to really embody that than community media. There is nobody that can tell your story better than you can tell it.
Wonderful. And last but not least, here is Ryan Pearson from the Detroit Narrative Agency. Thanks for joining us. I want to give you the mic.
Yeah, hey everybody. How's everybody doing? Exactly. My name is Ryan Pearson. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Executive Artistic Director of Detroit Narrative Agency, and similarly to Philly Cam, we support Black, Indigenous, and people of color filmmakers who are living and based in Detroit with both making their films and providing skill building opportunities in filmmaking in a variety of areas as well as a variety of entry levels. So long story short, from someone who's always wanted to make a film but has no idea where to start, to a fellowship we offer for like intermediate level filmmakers to take them to the next level in their career. We offer a range of support from fellowships to classes. And there's nothing like that that exists in Michigan or Detroit or has before DNA was created in 2015, which is terrible. Right? And so we hold a lot of this work in a lot of these spaces, but we wish for more and more opportunities like this, because as you can imagine, as a small organization, we can't serve as many folks as we would want to. So yeah. And then there's a video I shared. I'm not sure if it was cut because it was kind of long, but.
Okay, you want to tell me when? Cut whenever.
Yeah, that's sure. Detroit DNA was founded really to give Detroiters the opportunity to tell stories for and about Detroit, like for us, by us, literally. DNA is a social justice-based organization. The film industry can be very exclusive and gatekeeping, and that's one of our values, is to be the antithesis of that. We make our programming very accessible. A lot of our participants either work in film or in completely different industries, some adjacent industries. We came up with the workshop series so that it would be set series of classes that people could learn from. And then from there, you know, if they have more interest or they want to learn more, they can join some of our other programs that do require a longer time commitment or like a project-based program if they have a film idea. We wanted this to be a very low stakes opportunity for people to just kind of learn.
This is very rare, at least for the Detroit area. A lot of workshops that happen are normally in LA, Atlanta, Chicago, sometimes Tennessee, like Nashville, New York. But to have in-person small groups and people that are in the industry, that have been there for a while, that you can actually talk to and learn from, is just priceless.
I found out about the workshop through DNA's Instagram. I was super excited and impressed by this series, and I applied so quickly so I could get on the list. The things that I learned today are definitely going to help me when I create my next short film. I'm thinking about my audio starter kit, about how I can conceal the mic and make sure I have really clear and crisp audio. It made me be more intentional and thoughtful. I'm gonna be producing my short film in Detroit. I wanna create more stories about Detroit. I feel like there's not enough. And as a Detroiter, I wanna show the beauty, the complexity that's all within my city.
While Detroit is not seen as a hub necessarily for filmmaking, there has been filmmaking happening here. Filmmaking will continue to be happening here. And also, most importantly, there is a community of filmmakers of color here who tell amazing stories, are very technically skilled, and even folks who don't have the skills are learning it through this program. DNA is really here to be a bridge. Like, we want to connect people to learning opportunities, professional opportunities should they decide to pursue film professionally, or even if someone wants to just learn how to make a film, you know, for their family or something. We want to be a bridge between the community and accessible filmmaking, and that's why we're here.
Thank you for bearing with all these introductions, but I want to get back to the central question that Lana introduced to everyone here. And I think to get to that, we really have to define what this regionalism is and why it's important. And to do that, I really think the first kind of process or way to do that is really think about how we frame this work and where we position ourselves. And in many of the conversations, many of the clips even, there's a sort of us versus them. We are owning our own and ourselves, and that is in contrary position to someone else. And often in this conversation, it's around a media hub. And so I'm guessing for your organizations and also for your constituents, your filmmakers, your emerging folks, your students, where do you see this framework, and what separates you from, say, a hub, a media hub? I'd love to go one by one. We can start with Ryan.
Okay, great question. And I think just the region, first and foremost, like in the Midwest, we're outside of Chicago, there's not a ton of spaces or even what feels like opportunities to either be a filmmaker on a professional level where you can like sustain yourself completely from that, but even learning opportunities outside of universities or like really expensive studios that can be inaccessible. And so I think, I know for DNA, we actually aspire to be a hub for folks who either have not had access to filmmaking opportunities or just want to learn in an environment with people who look like them, being taught by people who look like them. And also, really quickly, DNA was founded initially in 2015 with the mission to shift harmful narratives about Detroit. And since then, we've kind of changed that language to building narrative power, just to not approach it from a deficit. And so we seek to be a hub to build narrative power through filmmaking.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of alliances and crossover with the work we do. I think for PhillyCam, a lot of folks come to us specifically because they don't feel represented in the news, right? Or they feel like there might be a story that's written about their neighborhood, but then that story is over after a short soundbite, and so they're sort of picking up the string and what happens a month later, 2 months later, and they're doing it from their perspective. So I think, while I don't always think about Philly as a regional hub, I think Philly is a city of neighborhoods, and like someone said, Antoine, in the clip, people feel their identity very strongly from the very block that they live on, and being able to have that level of it's almost like pointillism, in what we do, and people always ask well, who's the audience? And it's Philadelphia, every show is so different and has kind of its own potential audience, even though they're all rooted in kind of local place-based stories. So.
I think we have a very diverse group of members from Texas to Virginia in that sense. So, and outside of Atlanta and maybe New Orleans, everyone else is sort of feeling a little isolated in their process and becoming filmmakers or connecting to other filmmakers. So I think that's really kind of where we have our space, is to be able to connect them not only to each other, but also to industry professionals who we invite in on our monthly meetings, and I think we'll try to do more of that with the works in progress, to just sort of have an inclusive feel. But it's also, part of this is also, which I've heard a lot of, is this extractive storytelling about the South, and a part of what we're doing, I think, is trying to sort of help mitigate some of that through our members.
Yeah, there's a lot of everything that was said also applies to Apple Shop. I feel like we have a lot of very similar organizations here, and I love that. I love that we have those. So Apple Shop was founded in the War on Poverty, and the entire goal was initially to teach people how to be filmmakers to join the local filmmaking economy. But it was in Whitesburg, Kentucky, which is 3 hours away from any sort of major metropolitan area. There is no filmmaking. There is no, or at the time in the 60s, there was no hub for that. If you wanted to be a media maker, you were going to New York, you were going to LA, you were going somewhere else. And so the initial goal, and we've really tried to keep it going, is to make sure that, to try to not only teach people these skills, but try to impact local communities and impact local governments in such a way that we can build an opportunity for someone to not only be trained in media, like I was so honored to be able to do myself. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and I on a whim almost, I decided I wanted to do media, and I got the training, and I have had a job for the past decade in Appalachia where media jobs don't generally exist. So we really want to create a change in our culture and a change in our world to where you don't have to leave. There was a lot of extractive storytelling, but there's also a lot of extraction just in terms of people, because you have to go, or sometimes people feel like they have to go somewhere else. And I love the work you all are doing to create these hubs to stay in your own town, stay in your own home, and still do what you want to do. Love that.
Yeah, just to synthesize, I'm hearing that much of the work that you're doing and much of the constituents are participating is really about career building and career rearing. And I think, I'm wondering how you all define success and if that's really the sort of why, gets to the why of the work we do. And so how would you all define success as sort of this regionalist model?
It's actually something that came up, I think, in one of my first conversations with Lana around the subject. I have a 1-year-old son, or very nearly 1-year-old now. My wife just texted me, he's growing in his back molars. It's very exciting. And I would love to be in a world where Appalachia, specifically Central Appalachia, is a place that he feels not only comfortable staying, but that is his best path. When he's older, hopefully the world has changed in all the positive ways, and his best path for him can involve staying near home and not leaving like so many people have from Appalachia. And I feel like that's success for us, trying to educate people about our own region. One of the things that we also do is try to have impact in our films, but not only impact in terms of how can we change a law or how can we help people, but more importantly, how can we remind people that it is okay to be Appalachian, it is okay to be your own version of who you are, where you are.
I feel like in sort of framing this against a sort of national media hub like New York or wherever else, is there less of a career building focus? Is it more output driven? And that's where we find success as well. What do you all think?
I think there's just the kind of building on like the hub question. I think something that I was thinking about, and I think one of the real values someone mentioned earlier, right, the lack of, the way we're losing public spaces, the way we're having conversations with people like in the silos that we choose. And I think what's really amazing about PhillyCam, it's like a physical space where people come together to tell stories and do media, but they're coming from very different backgrounds. And because we're based in freedom of speech and we don't kind of curate the kinds of programming on the channel, we have to kind of set up some community guidelines to be able to hold a lot of different opinions. And I think that that's pretty amazing in that people get to know each other for people and then they learn about their story, and it kind of, it's a lot harder to have a stereotype about a person when you're in class with them and you're learning with them and you're sort of getting some of the backstory. So that didn't answer your question, but it was just the hub. I think it goes to the individual process of our members, like that learning, the fact of someone coming through the door, not knowing, and then they become an instructor, or then they lead a filmmaking group, or they're able to complete something. I think that that's a real marker of success for us. And then maybe they even leave PhillyCam, they start their own production company, or they're able to kind of freelance with a little more independence as well. So.
Yeah, I'd say for DNA, which is what we call Detroit Narrative Agency for short, it's actually a mix, because it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So if you're in a region where you don't even think a career in media or film is possible, then you may not necessarily be initially pursuing that as a career, but maybe just as a skill. Like you just want to learn about filmmaking or you're interested. And so what we found has happened, like with our founding, it was really about shifting harmful narratives about Detroit, and it started off with a seed grant. Just the folks, you didn't have to identify as a filmmaker at all, just people who wanted to tell a story about Detroit that was a counter narrative or just something that was not, filled with all the negative anti-Black stereotypes about Detroit, and from authentic Detroit, long-time Detroiters who had been there who wanted to tell a story through media. And so since then, it's evolved to where it's a mix of folks who want to learn filmmaking and learn how to tell stories through media and learn the technical skills and all the things needed for that. But also this really amazing evolution has happened where folks are like, oh, I can do this. Like, this is a viable career option for me. And to Aaron's point, I don't necessarily have to move to be able to do it. In Detroit, having a full-time career as a media maker definitely doesn't look like what it might look like on the coast, but it might involve working in commercials. It might involve working in anything that's like regional, like the big 3 car companies are always shooting commercials, and so people find work that way. And so it's a mix. I would say success for us would be folks leaving our programming, be it something like a fellowship where they're leaving with a film that they created to put in film festivals and to bolster and continue their careers, or people leaving with a skill set where if they want to create a beautiful video from their family reunion, they can do that, and it's not necessarily related to a career they're trying to build. So I would say it's kind of 50-50 with us.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there, and it kind of goes back to some other panels. I think in whether it's a sort of legal interpretation or journalism interpretation, I think people like to clearly define roles or positions, and I think, and especially in these hubs, in these smaller markets, in these places where we have to have other identities in our work, not necessarily demographic, but in the commercial work that I do and the and the filmmaking work. I think that's not necessarily unique to our region, but it is certainly something to gravitate towards in a conversation around documentary journalism and who can tell like facts in a non-biased or responsible way.
And to that point, just to jump in, it's not just regions that are not known as hubs where people have to do work they don't necessarily love to be able to do the work or to be able to do their passion projects and the work that they want to do.
Quida, I want to ask you here because another sort of point that I'm thinking about in answering what is regional and why it's important is intention. And you are a filmmaker and you have worked in New York. You're now based in Atlanta and in Montgomery. And I think there's an interesting thing there between intention and relegation and what you do in terms of choosing and what the filmmakers that you work with choose to do in the region that you're staying in, or that you do as a filmmaker yourself. So I'd love to hear you speak about what intention means for this sort of regional model.
Well, we are a younger organization than the rest of, and again, like member generated, like the work that we're doing is some of our own thought, so we come together and figure out what's next. And I think, I guess in answering that, the intention for us really, and which is my own story, about connecting people who are feeling isolated, who do not, because there, in a lot of the smaller towns and cities and where the filmmakers are, there's no infrastructure there, right? So how do we, that's sort of what we're starting to talk about now. It's like, how do we support these ideas about creating infrastructure so that people have these places to go? I grew up in Montgomery, and I did, as an artist, not knowing I could be a filmmaker, I felt like I had to leave, right? And so I went to New York, and most of my career has been New York, or based out of New York at least. And to come back over the last few years, to be back in Montgomery and as well as Atlanta, but primarily in Montgomery, working with filmmakers, local filmmakers there, their career trajectories in the whole look very different than what my experience was in New York. And so if we are, I think, even to just answer that question about success, if we are successful, I think we have created some kind of space where folks who are feeling isolated can come together and realize that they're sort of not alone in that sense. But also, our intention is very much that, which is like, we're gonna be here with you, and there are other people who are kind of facing some of the same issues that you are, and so I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah.
No, I think it does. I think another sort of point that I want to kind of touch on is how our work and the filmmakers that you work with, the media makers that you work with, what it means for their work to be presented in a way that is collectivized around similar ways of making it, similar ways of watching it, similar content. People in Detroit are making content together, and same in Philly, the same in the South and in Appalachia. What does it mean for that work to be contextualized together in sort of this regional model?
I know for Apple Shop, I think it means a lot to be able to see stories made by people who live in the same county as me, to know that we know what's important for us and we know what's important that we want the rest of the world to know, whereas otherwise that just wouldn't be told. It is a relatively small regional issue that affects a lot of people, but unless you're in Letcher County or unless you're in Pike County, you wouldn't know. I also think it's really impactful on our young people. We have a program where we teach young people in Appalachia how to make movies. It's kind of a continuation of our original mission. And to see 16-year-olds who tell us that when they came in, it's a paid internship, and that's why they joined over the summer. They just wanted some extra money. But by the end of it, they've learned how to make a movie. They've learned to analyze film and analyze documentary and journalism, and to understand the region in which they live. By the end of it, we had some interns tell us that my plans were to go to college elsewhere and then stay there. But now, after this summer program, I'm going to college for film in Kentucky, and I want to stay in Appalachia. And that, I think a lot of that success comes from being presented those stories in those ways from people who they can understand.
And if I could just add sort of, we've been working, this is our second year just passed, with the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival, Hot Springs, Arkansas. And because we are kind of working with such a vast group of Southern filmmakers, the stories are so different. And that was something that, kind of surprised me in a little ways, even though I'm from the South. But those things that kind of surprised me were the diversity of the stories and the very sort of nuanced Southern aspect of those stories. And to be able to sort of put those out, like they've invited us again next year to do these works in progress so that the audience really gets a sense of the diversity and of the stories that the South has to tell, kind of thing, right? So it's intentional. There are intentions, I think, in that sense of making stories that we haven't really seen before, or in a nuanced way, kind of thing. Yeah.
Just to continue kind of picking threads between all of this conversation, is this sort of regional model non-commercial in nature? Because I think so much of what we're doing obviously is nonprofit based, but thinking about the work itself, what does it mean to sort of be a public good in our work?
I think something that's interesting, right, about public access, and when it was starting, there were these fears, right, like before the internet, oh no, people are gonna make crazy stuff, it's gonna be like unhinged, and is that still happen? And now we have YouTube. We have other places where people can, be unhinged. But we have a process in PhillyCam to, we have an orientation process. We have like an onboarding process. We talk about how important collaboration is. And it kind of like weeds out people that just come to us to like get a thing done, because they're sort of forced to sit down and introduce themselves. And, maybe if they have an idea, we don't make it for them. We encourage them to take a class, meet someone else. So I think building collaboration in as a really key value is something that people learn, and not everyone is used to, but they sort of learn how to do it. And I think filmmaking, obviously, we know is very collaborative in nature. And so just uplifting that value is really important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. So DNA is a sponsored project of Allied Media Projects. And so if is anyone familiar with AMP here, Allied Media Projects? Yeah. And so if you know any of their tenants, which we adopt as well, one of them, the first one is we begin by listening. And so that is a value that we carry and like put at the root of all the work that we do. And so that looks like, I think a lot of times nonprofits, especially if you look at the root of them and how they were started, typically nonprofits historically were run by rich white women who were looking for like charity work to do, right? And so obviously seeing all of us up here, I don't know how many of us are rich, but I'm not. And I'm also not a white woman. And so I think that leadership transition to folks who look like the people that they are serving is very important. And I also think listening to your audience, listening to your constituents is what's important. You don't just prescribe what people should be doing. You ask them what they want. And so for us, that was one of the things that we did. Before we ever had a fellowship, we had these community sort of meetings where folks were invited, BIPOC Detroiters, long-time Detroiters, and they were asked, what stories are you tired of hearing about Detroit? And what stories do you want to hear about Detroit? And we led from there. And so I think that is the most important thing for us, is to always go back to our community and talk about what is it, like we are here for the community. So what does the community want and need from us?
Thanks, yeah. I want to make sure we have time for questions, and so maybe while you all ruminate and try to stump us, I want to recenter the conversation around sort of one last point, and I think it's, to go back to an answer and make sure we're on task for Lana, unpacking regionalism in documentary film. I think what we're trying to do in this conversation is explain more about what this model of filmmaking is, and what it's not so much about the place, and Laura was saying this earlier, it's not so much about the place or any specific place that this work is being done, but it's really about the way and the intentionality, the way it's being done and for whom it's being done, and by whom. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. And one sort of point, I think, in getting across this is, I think much of the work we're doing is trying to break down and go towards each other and who's next to us, this sort of horizontal way of making media, of distributing media, of telling stories, instead of necessarily coming down from on high and looking for permission in whatever form that takes, be it financial or something else. We're really looking to each other and as partnerships, in collaborations, in different communities that we're building together, and virtually or in person. I think that's what we're trying to do in this regional model, is really expand what this horizontal approach to filmmaking is, rather than, say, going to New York or another hub in DC even, where much of our national grants probably come from, and really turning to each other and for partnership to try to get this work done. Anyone have a first question for us? Yes, sir.
I loved hearing about the differences in what the actual material you spoke about, a nuanced approach. And is there anything more you can talk about that you've seen over the years? What ends up in the final product, and how is it different than someone like me from the East Coast coming and doing something?
I think at Apple Shop, it does. You can see in every piece that signature, that Appalachian stamp on everything you saw in that piece, that with the very distinct accents and the very distinct rage about what was happening to his home and his community. And that's, obviously, the rage is not unique to Appalachia, that's to anyone who's been harmed, but we have historically been harmed and extracted and exploited. But I think in Apple Shop, we really try to make sure that when we have a filmmaker making a piece, or we're teaching young people how to make their pieces, we ask them what's important to them, and not just what is important to them, but what is important to them in regards to them. How are they connected to that piece? How do they make this personal? And that comes with all those intersectionalities. We are Appalachian, which in and of itself is a minority. Many of our employees, many of our students are women or non-binary or trans or queer or BIPOC, or any number of intersectionalities and different identities. And how can you make your piece your piece? How can you bring your Appalachian identity into this to make it something that Pierre couldn't make? How can you make this into something that Laura couldn't make that is yours?
Ryan, I feel like you should answer that question too.
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, he's asking, is there a certain quality to the work that's output that you think makes it different from, say, when someone else makes it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, similarly to what Aaron said, I think that one of our values, for example, is not supporting people from outside of a community to come in and make extractive media about that community, right? And so something I can think of is our inaugural fellowship. Everyone who made a film, there were 5 filmmakers, had an identity that was tied to whatever their story was. So, for example, one of them was a web series that was counteracting the stereotypes and sort of negative, sad media about Black trans women dying and being killed at these alarming rates. And while that is true and something that absolutely needs to be highlighted, the filmmaker, her name is Aya Simone, wanted to celebrate Black trans joy. And so who better to tell that than a Black trans woman in Detroit who's telling a story about Black trans women in Detroit? And so we adopt that same sort of mentality around who best to tell your story but you.
Yeah, fully co-sign that, 100%.
We featured in our works in progress at Hot Springs last year, a film. Andy, so what's his name?
Sarjahani.
Yeah, he did Iranian Hillbilly. He grew up in Arkansas, Iranian. His parents were immigrated from Iran, and he tells us. I don't know that anyone else could have told that story, especially as it relates to being Southern and from Iran, especially during the uprising in Iran. So it's those kinds of nuanced things, I think, are, as everyone was saying, it lives within the filmmaker. So you could not have told that story. I couldn't have told that story, right? And so I think it's those kinds of things, but also I think, that sort of nuanced Southern piece for us is present throughout all of the films that we look at. And having spent so much time in New York, it's still very interesting to me as well. So, yeah.
And I would just add that, yes. Are we at time? Okay, you want a question? Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
You've got one.
I guess I'm wondering, you've talked a lot about supporting the individual makers in your communities, and I'm wondering about your robustness as organizations. I'm wondering about whether or not you feel like it was a flash in the pan moment and that it's gotten more difficult for you to raise the money to be able to sustain yourselves, because I know, for example, around that time in 2016, it was your organizations, but there was also Good Pitch Local that my friend Tricia Finneran ran, that has now gone by the wayside. And we find oftentimes when we have these moments and we're like, okay, that's the solution. We're going to give money towards, after the George Floyd murder, give money towards DEI, and now that's dried up, and even the conversation has reversed. What about regionalism? I want to know your healthiness and your sustainability as organizations.
I think it depends on how tied into the community you are. I think there were a lot of flash in the pan attempts, and I think that they were still very worthwhile and they should have been done. But I think it's a matter of, at least for Appleshop, I can speak to our success, I think really came from trying to be robust and diverse in our community. We tried not to just focus on, as we were making films, someone said, hey, what if we had a radio station? And then they did that. And then, hey, what if we had I think it'd be really cool if we had a theater troupe, and then they did that. Not that that's not difficult. Funding, especially for nonprofits, and funding for theater especially, is complicated, but I think the fact that we're doing it and the fact that people across the nation are still doing it, and there are newer organizations that have come up since that are still espousing the same wonderful values across the nation, I think it can be hard to sustain oneself, but I think it's the most important thing to do with these types of things.
Yeah. I want to answer that too, Lana. And I just to go back to kind of this horizontal approach to sustainability, if you will. Real South specifically has always been largely funded by either very similar public media organizations or arts organizations in the South. And so there's a sort of like passing on of funding that comes from somewhere else, that I think continues to keep some of these organizations afloat. And again, it turns to your peers to where we share similar missions or share similar focus or even a similar sort of goal for an output of what kind of film or media you're trying to, or story you're trying to tell. I think that we're turning to each other to kind of continue uplifting the work and keep ourselves going.
I guess I will say PhillyCam is unique because the PEG stations are funded by agreements between the city and the cable company. So every 12 years we renegotiate. We're part of the renegotiation process in Philly with Comcast and Verizon. And so a good more than half of our operating expenses come from subscribers. It's like a 20-cent line item on their bill that goes to fund us. And so every 10, 12 years we have to re-galvanize people and remind them why it's important. And I think this year we had a lot of good representation in City Council, and City Council kind of stepped in where Verizon was, kind of falling back. But I think it's an interesting model to think about when people demanded that cable companies were ripping up, the streets and the right of way. Okay, we should get something for that, right? How are we holding kind of companies that are benefiting from us accountable to give back to the public? And it's an interesting model. I don't know what it could continue to look like, but I think there is something there in terms of realizing that grant funding and the whims of grant, organizations is not always sustainable.
So, yeah, that is such a good question, Lana. And I think some of it, I'm a spiritual person, so some of it I'm like, we're blessed. The other part of it is our current funders, especially like our two biggest funders right now are Ford Foundation and Kresge Foundation. And so our program officers with both of those foundations have been amazing. They have been super supportive. They have connected us with other sources, other resources, other funders, and they have really been huge advocates. And honestly, I think that's what organizations like ours and nonprofits in general, you need your funders to help you and put the word out for you to get other people excited about your organization, to want to grant more money to you to not only expand, but sustain.
Well, we started out from the NEA and Sundance Institute, both of whom are no longer sort of supporting us financially. So we are kind of in that space where is it sort of forgotten? But at the same time, IMAS has made other relationships that are much more about exposing the work of the filmmakers. But we're now in this space now where we have to, because we're growing, we need additional support. And even though we've had these other kind of conversations with NEA and they are supportive in different kinds of ways, but I think it's going to be a challenge. We're challenged by it right now in terms of sustaining just a regular, someone to sort of help us keep organized and that kind of thing. So I don't know if it has anything to do with regionalism in the sense of, because 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of focus on it. I'm not sure how we will survive. I mean, I'm sure we will, but I'm not sure what the answer is to that, whether or not, we will be impacted by the kind of fall off of the regionalism support, which it seems. Yeah.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, IMAS, the region in the South, is one of the only, if not the only, sort of surviving regional arts meetup group from that effort from NEA and Sundance. So I think to further, to go back to your point, Lana, I think the people in this region, in that region specifically, are saying that it's still necessary and ready, and the funders may have decided that they have met their quota, that they have met their goals, and they can move on. But there's still thinking about like what Gordon was saying in his panel around sticking with your subjects and the films and the people in your communities for 50 years afterward. I think there needs to be a little bit more of a reconciliation between some of these funders and the projects that they start, and many of which these filmmakers have come to rely on for community, and really not for financial resources. This is purely a community gathering effort. So finding ways to sort of continue that effort to sustain this for the long term, for a longer term, is really important.
I have another question. So to that point, I'm wondering about whether or not it's possible to, it just seems as if at some point there was I'm wondering if we're talking to each other in these different regions. And it's important that we talk to each other and we talk to our communities, but I'm wondering particularly if it's crossing outside of our communities as well. Or do you feel as though it's one of the beauties of Cartemquin is that, they've got this roster of films that have been successful, nationally and worldwide. And I'm wondering if that is the thing that keeps it in a very precarious or tenuous position. Do you have to have Hoop Dreams in your region in order to keep the funders coming in?
Yeah, for 25 years before Hoop Dreams, we were surviving. And I think for me, after Hoop Dreams, that's what everybody knows about us, but that's not how we survive. For many years, we did a lot of commercial and industrial work, and that was what was subsidizing the films that including Hoop Dreams, that we thought was important. But one of the things that I don't think we pay enough attention to, there's two things. Years ago, I came to a convening about regional filmmaking that Apple Shop hosted. And I think we need to make the case nationally for the importance of regional filmmaking as an issue of diversity, so that we need to be, connecting more as organizations. The other thing that I think is important, I was involved in the initial Chicago battle for cable access. Where do you have power? Cable access was incredible because we had the ability to actually bring to bear pressure upon the commercial sector to say, you're coming into our city, we have organized, we've got the city council behind us, and if you're going to rip up our streets, we're going to get something back. You can do that now. When ITVS didn't come out of thin air. We battled for it for years. We'd come to this city and negotiate with PBS, and eventually we got fed up with the lack of regional diversity in terms of where the money was going. We went to Congress and we, don't rock the boat. They said, blah, 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 you'll get everything you want. Too late. We've spent years at this. We went to Congress, we lobbied, and we won. So I think building those coalitions where we've thought strategically about where do we have leverage, either with government or with the private sector or with our local communities. I think we ignore sometimes the fact that there is money in those local communities, and how can we play a role in a sense of advocates and as political actors to say we want a piece of that.
And I think something that happens, and something that's really important to PhillyCam, is like when you make your own media, you learn how media is made, right? So if we think about the space we're in around understanding how, misinformation, how people understand how media circulates, how it's produced, there's no better way to do that than to make it yourself and start to peel back the layers of like, oh, I can take this sound from here and put that there. Oh, I know what a close-up shot is. I know, without going to film school and getting kind of that training, it's extremely powerful in how people understand the media they consume when they start kind of making it and thinking critically about it. So it's not just about creating more content producers, but creating more kind of responsible media consumers, So.
Yeah, you quickly gain media literacy when you realize exactly how easy it is to make a Frankenclip and put someone saying something they didn't say or didn't mean to say, and the terrifying ethical implications of having that power.
Yeah, and I would say, like with DNA, we mostly work in short form, and so shorts are not known for like necessarily blowing up and making a lot of money. They can do well on the film festival circuit and tend to help people get to their next level in their film career. And so I think that's one area we don't worry about too much, just in terms of like, do we have to have this explosive sort of result in order for people to still pay attention to us? But I would be remiss to say like it doesn't cross my mind, which irritates me and is frustrating, but is also a part of the game when you get most of your funding from foundations, of like, is our programming still going to be relevant? Are people still going to think what we're doing is interesting and worth funding? And so I think that anxiety as a nonprofit like ED is always there to some degree.
We have time for one final question before the next break panel. Naveen?
Hey, Naveen here. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. We do a lot of short film screenings, and so I'm kind of curious, even what you kind of just said, Ryan, and to you all, what have you found successful as a way to distribute the work that you all have a hand in making, especially with short projects?
Yeah, that is a great question. And like, we have not necessarily had like huge distribution opportunities at this point. I would say like one of the biggest from our first fellowship, if you guys are probably familiar with Open Television in Chicago, a web series got, I guess, distribution through OTV for a certain amount of time, which was amazing. And so I feel like most of our distribution kind of comes in that way, where people are interested, they know about the films or they've seen them at a festival or something like that, or even the filmmakers have like shared their links, et cetera. And so people will approach to bring that programming like to their city or to their festival or something like that. But yeah, we've actually never had a huge, like any sort of formalized distribution deal with the content that's made through our programs. But it's definitely something that we're totally open to and interested in if there was value alignment and all of that.
Yeah, that's actually a big focus of my job for the past year. I got put into a distribution role, so it's a really good question. And also, if you're in Louisville, we should talk. We'll do some screenings there. But yeah, we focused on trying to, what's worked for us recently was YouTube, weirdly enough, especially where most of our catalog is a bit older. And at the time, before last year, the best way to get a hold of it was to buy a DVD. And I don't know how many people in this room, who's bought a DVD this year? It's not the most numbers here. So, and you know, we really wanted to make sure that to remove that paywall, to have these stories be seen. So most of our movies are up on YouTube, or at least about half of them now, going one a week. And I'm also working with film distribution people to do streaming distribution, streaming services, Amazon, Freevee, Tubi, all the funny little names I'll never remember. But I think it's also really important. One of the things I'm most proud of is getting our films on local television channels. The films are about local people and local struggles, and it's really important to me that we've been able to get on local television channels within Pike County, Letcher County, Harlan County, and let the people about whom these films are made and about whom the work is intended get to watch them for free and easily available.
Well, most of our efforts really are to expose the work of filmmakers. And I just, like at Hot Springs last year again, there was How to Sue the Klan, which was a short film out of Tennessee. And it actually...
here on Saturday at noon, by the way.
Oh, is it? Yeah, so that's a lot of our efforts, is to sort of get it in, get our film, get filmmakers' films in front of people who make decisions about distribution. So, yeah.
All right. I think that wraps up our time for today. Thanks for joining us.
I just wanted to do one final note. I want to thank the tech crew and all of our volunteers. I got to speak with them earlier, and they're lovely, and everything's going so well.